Okay, everyone, as you can see, this is the None of Our Businesses Roundtable, recording from our homes again, amidst everyone self uh, quarantining, so to speak, staying at home. Now, I don't want to use that word wrong. None of us have tested positive. Everybody on our team is safe and happy so far, and but yeah, we're staying home to be safe, and we are still coming to you to talk about the current events in accounting and finance and business from an accountant's point of view. So we'll take it away with some articles. Who wants to give us a start here today?
I've got an article from CNBC, which I can actually pop on the screen here. So basically, it's an article discussing, current events right now is very much driven by the coronavirus, of course. And so an article talking about how jobless claims have soared past 3 million to a record high. And so I wanted to show this graphic just to kind of put it in perspective, because it's not one of those numbers that you keep at the forefront of like how many unemployment claims are, but obviously this virus has kept everybody at home, which has eliminated a bunch of different jobs. And we're seeing that as those agencies that are trying to keep up with everything are, not able to. And so I guess I just wanted to kind of use this article as a platform to kind of get you guys' opinion on the changes that are taking place in the market right now. And yeah, anything that we can think to say to be helpful here.
Yeah, I was surprised it was this many. I thought maybe that it was, I guess because the virus is so new, I thought maybe that it would be less or we would see more in the coming weeks. But to see that like what was it, 3 million or 1.7 just in the last week, but 3 million overall in the last 3 weeks that had to file for unemployment is shocking to say the least. But understandable given that, well, even here in Oregon, we have a shelter-in-place order, and I think throughout most of the country, especially on the coast, everybody's kind of sheltered in place. So whether those unemployment claims remain temporary or if they're, going to skyrocket again or remain chronically unemployed, I think is yet to be seen. But I was surprised at the raw number of it. And I'm just wondering, at what point, does that turn into another great recession? I don't know. It's worrisome.
Yeah, it definitely seems like all the signs are pointing in that direction as you look at all the hard data now. And so it's hard to feel positive about it. But yeah, I think it's it's obviously terrible to those that it's happening to, but it's a good thing that people are willing to, that everyone is doing their part to help stop the spread of the virus. And so you can look at it as a terrible thing, and it is. But yeah, I'm trying to see the bright side of this not very good situation.
So the thing that I've wondered about this is, the thing that I've wondered about this data and everything is, if everybody who's staying home is people who've been deemed not to have kind of essential jobs, or people who otherwise can do their work remotely, right? So the only ones who are allowed to go into work are people who are in essential, there's something deemed by whatever jurisdiction they're in to be essential jobs that can't just be done from home. So it makes me wonder, like, this kind of a side question, or just an academic question, of course, is, well, had this happened 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, would the number of non-essential jobs where people who maybe can't necessarily work from home, but their work is not considered essential, so they're just sent home, their offices or their workplaces closed, their facilities closed, and they just have to go home because their work is not deemed to be, and their jobs aren't considered to be essential jobs. Has the number of people working in these so-called non-essential jobs increased over time? Like, do we have a lot more people now as a percentage of the overall economy that are working in non-essential jobs than were working in non-essential jobs, say, 50 years ago? Yeah, don't know the answer, but I just thought that would be an interesting question about this point. And then it kind of leads to the question that you were asking, AJ, about, well, does this become systematic unemployment, and where does this go? Because it's like, well, if people basically are losing jobs that are not necessarily essential, do we just go back to doing the same non-essential work after this blows over, or do we go back to doing some other kind of non-essential work after this blows over?
Well, I think it all depends too on what you're considering essential workers. I don't necessarily know 40 years ago they would have considered like the food industry to be an essential worker, but right now they consider like fast food drive-throughs are still open, and I think we've seen a big shift in the economy towards like I forget the year, but in the 2000s Texas was bolstering like large unemployment numbers and jobs being available, but when you look closer at those numbers, it was all due to like entry level or food level service kind of jobs. And more recently, there was an article put out that said that more than half Americans eat out for the majority of their meals. And so I think we've seen a shift probably in the last like for sure 100 years, but definitely in the last like 50 years to, I guess, a different kind of essential worker. Like I don't think people would have thought fast food and food workers and that kind of job or those kind of businesses being essential before, but now they're really considered essential. I think in this crisis, food workers are continuing to show up and provide meals to people. For that, grocery stores being the other part. I think a lot of people, even my mom's generation, she's in her 70s, but in the 40s and 50s and 60s, you still raise part of your home cooking at home. She had chickens and stuff like that. Of course, we live in Portland. Everybody has chickens in Portland, and I think to a certain degree, Ty, you're a gardener, like people do grow their own food. But for the most part in America, I think, especially like in large metropolitan areas, people are shying away from that, and that's really considered an essential job now and probably wouldn't have been counted 50 years ago.
Yeah, and I think, with regard to gardening, I garden for aesthetics. I do grow vegetables and things like that, but I certainly don't grow at scale enough to even feed myself. So yeah, we're not, nothing like subsistence farming. We're definitely not. I definitely don't have the skill set or the putting in the work to be growing at that level. And I would say I would expect that's true with most people that do any kind of gardening around the city. That's probably the case. So yeah, the food system is different now than it was then. So that's a very specific perspective on this point about not just is the total number of essential workers versus non-essential workers, has that changed over the last 50 to 100 years, but also what we consider to be essential, non-essential. To your point, yeah, the food supply system is different now than it was 50 to 100 years ago, for sure.
Yeah, and there's kind of a third metric to that. So it's kind of like what's changed between, what was considered essential back then versus what's considered essential today. And then what's considered essential like really today with all these new developments. Because for example, like the toilet paper industry wasn't probably ever considered to be an essential industry. But now with all of these changes, that's definitely something that has had a lot of strain put on it. But on the topic of just like gardening, I think that'll be another good example of something that's going to change in the near future is that, I'm right now kind of kicking myself for not having a garden that can provide the kind of, enough vegetables to feed my family. Cause that would be a good thing to have right now.
It's going to be popular again, right? Like the victory gardens during World War II. And it had a little bit of a resurgence in terms of popularity, I think, during our last recession a little bit too. You saw more people like getting really interested in gardening, and I think gardening's near and dear to my heart. I've thought about different kinds of gardening related businesses that would be fun that I might run someday. So yeah, this might be the time to think about that in more seriously.
Well, I think also to note too, and one of the things that we've seen that's really good that's come out of this is seeing like agile businesses pivot. We've heard of like, liquor distributors changing their model and selling like hand sanitizer supplies. We've seen like the auto industry get into making ventilators. So I think it speaks to, a bright spot to this story might be the economic engine that drives America. Probably is still that small business and that entrepreneurial sense, and being agile enough to pivot. You know, like an automaker or Dyson, for instance, have both switched to making ventilators now, and then, like I mentioned, the spirit industry, and then you see on the news the fashion designers making masks for first responders and such. So there is some opportunity, I think, in the market, and I think that the value that those people add to their brand, being able to keep their employees employed, and then also the value delivered to the American people during a time of crisis, is probably very bolsterous. So it's interesting, and I don't know that you would have had that kind of agility 50 years ago, to your point, Ty, to pivot that quickly and change from being a muffler manufacturer to a ventilator manufacturer, you know?
That's a good question. I mean, we do have data on this in the sense that they did do this in terms of having companies in industry switch to making important parts toward the war effort, right? So during World War II, they did use the War Powers Act or whatever that is to basically enlist corporate America to build things that were needed for the war effort, and they did repurpose businesses that way, and they had to very quickly because, and as you all know, the story went, Pearl Harbor was bombed, and then we were declaring war very quickly at that point, and so they had to mobilize industry very quickly on that. So yeah, it is interesting to consider the juxtaposition of your point of, you would think with technological advancement, we might have the ability, and just the sheer breadth of different kinds of things that exist today versus 50 to 100 years ago, we would have the ability to pivot much faster than was pivoted back then. But actually, because of politics and culture and things like that, we haven't pivoted as quickly just because there wasn't enough effort to do so, it seems like.
Yeah, and a lot of the pivoting we've seen has been not so much pivoting in what they're providing, but just how they're doing it. So everybody's pivoting to work from home, and everybody's, pivoting in their own little way and trying to retain as much of the staff as they can, rather than changing who their customer is or, how they provide their service.